Welcome to Learn Arunachal GK. Today, let's look into the history of Arunachal Pradesh. Known beautifully as the land of the dawn-lit mountains, this is India's northeasternmost state, with its capital right at Itanagar. You know, it's a land of absolutely incredible strategic and cultural importance. It borders Bhutan to the west, Myanmar to the east, and shares a highly disputed 1,129-kilometer border with China's Tibet region. Plus, it's remarkably diverse. We're talking about a home to over 26 major tribes. That includes the Nishi, who are the largest group, right alongside the Adi, Apatini, Mampa, and Mishmi. In this explainer, we're going to follow a strict chronological timeline through 6 key eras: the ancient and medieval era, British colonial rule, integration into India, the 1962 Sino-Indian War, the path to full statehood, and finally, modern border disputes. All right, let's start with Section 1, the ancient and medieval era. Okay, so let's dive into this early timeline, because honestly, this is absolutely foundational for your APBSC or general knowledge exams. Between 500 BCE and 600 CE, the northwest region of present-day Arunachal Pradesh was under the Mampa kingdom of Monyul, which had super close ties to Tibet. Jumping forward a bit to 837 CE, Monyul was actually ruled by Gungkao Gyal, a descendant of an exiled Tibetan prince. Now, watch what happens in the 17th century. It's a really busy time. The 5th Dalai Lama built regional forts called dzongs, specifically in Direng, Taklung, and Gyeongkar, basically to make tax collection easier. Crucially, between 1680 and 1681, the magnificent Tawang Monastery was constructed. Fun fact, this is literally the largest monastery in India. And just a couple of years later, in 1683, the 6th Dalai Lama, Sangyong Yatso, was born right there in Tawang, living until 1706. So you can clearly see those deep historical ties to Tibet. But a really fascinating contrast exists here. While the Northwest was deeply intertwined with Tibetan Buddhism, down in the foothills, the Chuta kings were in control from the 8th to the 15th century. They left behind some major archaeological sites that you definitely need to memorize for your exams, like Bismarck Nagar, Ida Fort, and the Malanithan Temple. Meanwhile, the interior hill tribes, like the Nishi, Adi, Apatani, Mompa, Mishmi, Nokde, and Wancho, they stayed fiercely autonomous. They governed themselves through clan councils and hereditary chiefs, and kept up this really active trade network, swapping salt, cloth, and livestock with the folks down in the plains. Moving right along to Section 2, British colonial rule. Let's see how these colonial shifts essentially built the modern map we know today. Following the First Anglo-Burmese War, the British swooped in and took over Assam. After inheriting the old tribal tribute systems, they introduced the Frontier Tract Regulation in 1880. This established the famous Inner Line to carefully manage migration and interactions. Fast forward a bit to 1912 and 1913. Chinese military activity in Tibet started making the British pretty nervous, so they sent formal survey missions, specifically the Miri, Abor, and Mishmi missions, to strictly define the frontier. This step-by-step progression leads us right to the monumental 1913 to 1914 Simla Conference. This is where British official Sir Henry McMahon drew the famous 550-mile McMahon Line to serve as the India-Tibet border. Now, while Tibet and Britain agreed to it, China officially rejected it. Regardless, by 1937 and 1938, the Survey of India went ahead and formally published maps showing the McMahon Line as India's firm border. So, the map was drawn, right? While the reality on the ground was actually far more complex. In 1938, British forces under Captain Lightfoot pushed forward and officially declared Tawang to be Indian territory, which, as you might guess, immediately sparked protests from Tibet. The crucial takeaway here is that despite Captain Lightfoot's declaration, Tawang actually remained under practical, day-to-day Tibetan administration for over a decade more, all the way until 1951. Which brings us to Section 3, Integration into India. Okay, here is a critical name for your notes, one that pops up in exams all the time, Roleng Kathing. Think about the context. We have a newly independent India established in 1947 on one side, and the People's Republic of China founded in 1949 on the other. And remember, China firmly rejected the validity of that McMahon line. So India urgently needed to consolidate its borders. In February 1951, Roleng Kathing spearheaded a definitive Indian mission straight into Tawang. His leadership formally and finally ended that Tibetan administration we just talked about, firmly integrating the area under Indian control. Shortly after that incredibly successful mission, in 1954, the Indian government moved to establish a cohesive administrative structure. The entire region was officially organized and designated as the Northeast Frontier Agency. You'll almost always hear this referred to by its acronym, NIFA. Section 4, the 1962 Sino-Indian War. The before and after picture of this conflict is just striking. Prior to 1962, even with all the border tensions, the local tribes maintained a really active traditional barter trade with Tibet. But then, in 1962, China invaded. They captured most of Nefa, including the highly strategic town of Tawang. Then, in 1963, China declared a unilateral ceasefire, withdrew its forces back to the McMahon Line, and returned the Indian prisoners of war. The geopolitical shockwave of this was just massive, and on a local, human level, it permanently ended the traditional barter trade that had literally sustained those frontier communities for centuries. Section 5, Path to Full Statehood. After that devastating war, the Indian government fully recognized the absolute necessity of speeding up the region's political evolution and integration. Please note this exact date for your exams, January 20, 1972. This is the day Nefa was officially renamed Arunachal Pradesh. Now, at this point, it wasn't a full state yet. It was granted the status of a union territory under the government of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. But this transition is what finally gave the region its beautiful modern name, the land of the dawn-lit mountains. And exactly 15 years and 1 month later, on February 20th, 1987, Arunachal Pradesh achieved its ultimate political milestone, full statehood. This transition to a full state of India happened under the government of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. These two dates, 1972 for Union Territory and 1987 for statehood, are absolute must-knows for your GK prep. Don't mix them up. Section 6, Modern Border Disputes. So, the geopolitical friction obviously didn't just disappear in the 1960s. Impartially looking at the situation today, China still officially claims Arunachal Pradesh, especially the Tawang region, referring to it as South Tibet. And this tension frequently flares up. For instance, in 2017, China lodged formal protests over the Dalai Lama's visit to Tawang. More recently, in 2024, the New York Times reported satellite evidence showing that China has been building villages populated by state-subsidized border guardians directly inside disputed territory along the Arunachala frontier. Ultimately, when you step back, the identity of Arunachal Pradesh is incredibly complex. It's a culturally rich, strategically vital Indian state, but every single era we've just covered is still alive in its present. The state is heavily defined by its layered history of ancient tribal kingdoms, that deep-rooted Tibetan Buddhist influence, the rigid colonial mapping by the British, and of course those highly sensitive modern border disputes that require constant vigilance today. So as you wrap up your notes and prepare for those exams, I want you to consider this question. How do these deep historical roots from the Chutia kings and the McMahon line all the way to the events of 1962 and beyond predict the strategic future of this vibrant dawn-lit state? Because history isn't just a bunch of old dates, it's actively drawing the map of tomorrow. Keep studying, keep asking questions, and you're going to do great on your exams. Thanks for joining this explainer.